Okay, here's a little explanation on the reassembly of the valve body. Not much to say, not much to tell. It was pretty much like taking it back apart. You have to follow the instructions that came in your rebuild or your shift kit. I gotta say, the only reason I'm making this video instead of just mentioning it as a footnote in the next video I plan on making here is because, you know, there were a few springs that were replaced in this. Not every spring needs to be replaced, however. The shift kit only comes with the springs that is actually going to improve the faults, the design faults that were, present in this transmission, in this valve body. There were a number of faults that, or flaws, I should say, from the factory that this shift kit repairs, like adding thicker springs or adding dual coiled springs or adding longer or shorter springs in certain spots. There were about 6 or 7 springs you need to replace, and I kept all of them, so I can show you that in a minute. But the number one thing that was the most changed and most probably difficult to wrap my mind around is this TV, throttle valve here. See how that springs back on me like that, like with extreme force? It wasn't like that before. That's because there are 2 separate springs plus a spacer inside that weren't in there before, and that was the most detailed one to tell. If you go on over here to all of our old springs here, I kept them. I got 204 factory valve kit labeled on here. I don't know if you can see it, but this tiny spring here was all that was in that throttle valve before I took it apart. Now there's 2 separate springs in there plus a spacer, which I'll show you here in the instructions. Okay, right here, that's your throttle valve. This is the whole deal here. All these red notes are all the springs that you had to replace with the original ones. So like this one over here had 2 options. It was blue or red, and there was a blue spring and a red spring. And depending on which transmission you have, this 2 to 3 TV valve here, which is kind of stupid because it's throttle valve, so I don't know. Anyway, this will be slightly different depending on which transmission you have, and there's a lot of like things for diesels and gas in certain years and stuff. This will be different. So it comes with both springs, just in case. A blue one and a red one. And for me, I replaced the old one. It was a green or orange, I think, spring came out of this, and it ended up being the blue one, which was the bigger one. So over here, here's the red one that it came with, and this was too small. This would have been for an earlier model 200 turbo 200 transmission. But see this large spring right here, this tinier one, mine was blue, but it was the same deal, is a lot skinnier and a lot longer, but it's harder to compress. See that? Oops. So that's the gist of how many, what the deal is with all the springs, replacing them. But as I was saying, the TV throttle valve here has 3 springs labeled, and it looks like, oh, it wants you to put them all in. Well, that's not the case. There is going to be a red tiny spring, a blue tiny spring, and then an orange, like, thick spring, right? And what it wants you to do is it wants you to look for the ribs on your TV stem here, on the throttle valve stem. And if it's got 1 rib, then you're going to want to use the blue, what do you call it? The blue spring and the orange spring. But if it's got the 2 ribs, then you're going to want to put the red spring on, and then the blue spring, and then the orange spring. So only if it's got these 2 here do you want to use all 3 of these springs. If it's got 1 or none, like mine had was none, it's just going to be the blue and the orange one. Blue goes in first, orange goes over it, and that's what you do. The next part here is this thing. Shift kit spacer, TV spacer, goes inside this spring here, and then the sleeve goes over the spring, and the plunger sticks in the sleeve. This I thought was just a thing that you'd stamp on the side of the transmission that says, oh, this was rebuilt with a shift kit. No, this is a spacer. It actually does something. I don't know what it does. It's kind of explained down here, so you can read it if you want. But that was the main thing that I wanted to make sure to explain, is that if you have these 2 ribs, you're going to want to use all 3 of these springs. See, there's all models right there. and that says 2 rib valves use red also. That just means if it's got these 2 ribs on your valve stem here, then you're going to want to use the red one as well. But mine didn't have that. So that's basically it. Save all your old springs just in case you need them. Now the next thing I'm gonna do is I already drilled out the holes. That hole. These two, it says to plug the big one and drill the smaller one out to be bigger, but I'm not gonna do it because this is a 3rd gear failure correction, and mine didn't fail, so whatever. This is a 2nd gear hole, and this, one of the faults that it detects inside the instruction manual there is that this hole will get worn out over time and the check ball won't sit in there right. So this gold check ball in here is actually for, I previously thought it was for the check ball that's inside that, but it's not. It's for this hole here so that the check ball will sit on top of it like it should instead of falling through. So when I put this transmission together, I'm going to look at that and see if it's a fault, because that will cause a missed 2nd gear, will cause no 2nd gear if that check ball isn't sitting there correctly. So that's what that's for. I've got this done, so I'm about to start putting the check balls back in the transmission body here. I'm gonna put my 2nd gear or my 3rd gear accumulator in here. I'm gonna put the governor in, and then we're gonna start putting gaskets and getting it back together. But yeah, I'll record that when I do it here.